Beneath the rubble of empire and the silence of cathedrals, a shadow war unfolded, one written not in gunfire, but in signatures, secrets, and sanctified lies. What if the world's holiest city was the final sanctuary for the world's most unholy men? Tonight, we descend into the vaults of power, where faith and fascism traded blessings in the dark. You're about to open a file they tried to bury in marble. Whispers in Warsaw, the Pianist spy. The first time Elżbieta Corwin played Chopin for the Gestapo, her hands trembled, but only slightly. The officer didn't notice. She was seated at a grand piano in the salon of a requisitioned manor in Warsaw, the cream-colored walls adorned with stolen art and the windows blacked out to hide from Allied bombers. Her music floated like smoke, sweet and haunting, and no one suspected that inside the sheets of music lay messages coded for London. Elżbieta had once performed in glittering concert halls, praised as the youngest prodigy to grace Krakow's Philharmonic stage. But that world had crumbled in September 1939, when the Nazis rolled into Poland with tanks and torchlight. Her father, a university professor, was shot during the first roundups. Her mother, Jewish, vanished one winter night in the direction of Treblinka. Elżbieta fled into the heart of Warsaw, and there, amid ruin and fear, she found purpose. By 1942, Elżbieta was no longer just a pianist. She was a courier for the Polish underground, her music a cover for resistance. Her contact, a British agent known only as Mr. Raven, taught her how to encrypt information using modified musical notation. Coded messages were hidden in key changes, deliberate tempo errors, or dynamics that made no musical sense unless read through the cipher. Sheet music she carried to performances became wartime intelligence, enemy troop movements, train schedules, plans for deportations. To those who watched, she was merely a nervous young woman grateful for a chance to perform again. But within her careful arpeggios were secrets meant for London, transmitted through a vast network of resistance fighters, nuns, students, and postal clerks who risked everything to pass along information under the Nazis' noses. Elżbieta lived in a hidden room behind a tailor's shop in the Praga district. The tailor, Mr. Jakub Szymanski, was an old friend of her father's and pretended not to know the true nature of her visits. His son, Mateusz, a quiet boy with intelligent eyes, brought her news from the street, who had been arrested, which officers were posted where, who had disappeared. Mateusz became her unofficial assistant, delivering forgotten music books or tuning a piano while Elżbieta planted intelligence in plain sight. Then came the request from the Gestapo. She was to perform at a small gathering at the Hotel Bristol. The audience would include high-ranking officers, collaborators, and one particular man, Obersturmbannführer Erich Vogel, a brutal enforcer of deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto. It was dangerous, but it was also an opportunity. Mr. Raven handed her the most vital code of her life, a message from an informant inside the German ranks revealing the exact date and route of a planned Jewish deportation train. The Allies needed that information to sabotage the rail line. It was too dangerous to pass on via the usual runners. Elżbieta would hide the message in a Bach partita and perform it in front of Vogel himself. From there, a sympathetic Polish waiter at the hotel would intercept her music and carry it to the next contact. The night of the performance, Elżbieta wore her mother's last possession, a blue silk scarf. Her hands were steady now. The suite began, each note played not for art, but for lives. To anyone else, it was flawless. But to the eyes of the underground, it was urgent language. Halt the train on October 13th, Bridge 17, north of Radom. As she stood to bow, Vogel approached. He took her hand in his glove and smiled thinly. "You have a gift," he said. "Do you know what they call you among us?" "No, Herr Obersturmbannführer, the Nightingale of Warsaw. But I wonder if your song is too clever for its own good." He let her go. Her knees almost gave out, but she forced herself to walk away, slow and poised. At the service entrance, she passed the sheet music to the hotel's waiter, a man named Adam. She never saw him again. 2 days later, the resistance reported that the Radom train had been derailed by partisans. Over 300 Jewish prisoners escaped into the woods. It was a small victory in a losing war, but a real one. Elżbieta's name began to circulate more widely in the underground. Some called her a hero. Others whispered that she was reckless. She continued performing, both for the Germans and, in secret, for the Polish people. In cellars and bombed-out buildings, her music offered comfort and code. But betrayal was inevitable. In early 1944, a courier captured under torture revealed fragments of their network. The Gestapo raided the tailor's shop. Mr. Szymanski was executed on the spot. Elżbieta, hiding in the crawlspace, was captured 3 days later in a sweep near the Vistula River. She was taken to Pojak prison. They beat her, starved her, and demanded names. She gave them nothing. Her fingernails were pulled. Her wrists were broken. But she refused to speak. One guard, a Czech conscript named Joseph, smuggled her a pencil and scraps of paper. He recognized her face from before the war. In exchange for silence, she gave him one final piece of music, a simple nocturne in a minor. It would be the last thing she ever wrote. No one knew if it contained a message. But after the war, the sheet was found hidden in a hollow brick in the prison wall, and British codebreakers spent months analyzing it. Elżbieta was executed by firing squad in March 1944. She was 24 years old. In 1951, a declassified SOE memo credited a female courier embedded in Warsaw musical circles with helping to derail 5 transports and expose one high-ranking Nazi informant. Her real name was not included. Only decades later, in post-communist Poland, did her story begin to surface again. A French documentary team investigating wartime musicians found her name in the logbooks of the Krakow Philharmonic and traced her performances through surviving concert programs. They interviewed Mateusz Szymanski, now a grandfather in Chicago, who confirmed it all. Her legacy survives in 2 places, a battered upright piano in a Warsaw museum, and in recordings of a nocturne played in near silence, notes trailing like breath in winter air. Some say that if you listen closely, the melody changes ever so slightly each time it is played, as if still sending a message meant only for those who know how to hear it. Steel Ghosts of the Steppe, the 54th Armored Shadows. In the bleak winter of 1942, as the German 6th Army clawed at the gates of Stalingrad, rumors spread across the front lines of a Soviet armored division that seemed to appear and vanish like ghosts in the snow. They struck at night, without warning, from the dense woods or crumbled factories, then disappeared before the Luftwaffe could respond. The Germans gave them a nickname whispered in fear: Die Stahlgeister, the Steel Ghosts. Official Soviet records referred only vaguely to a unit known as the 54th Armored Guards Division. In the chaos of the Eastern Front, many formations were formed and destroyed without leaving a trace. But survivors, both Russian and German, spoke of the 54th as something more. Something impossible. The truth, uncovered decades later in the declassified archives of the Russian Ministry of Defense, tells a story born of desperation, cunning, and sacrifice. The 54th was formed not in a traditional tank school or Red Army base, but deep in the forests of the Ural Mountains. Its first commander was a grizzled partisan named Colonel Grigory Semyonov, a former railroad engineer who had once blown up German supply trains behind enemy lines. He was joined by an unlikely cadre: Siberian lumberjacks with no military training, female tractor drivers from the collective farms, and political prisoners promised amnesty in exchange for service. Many had never even seen a tank. Their machines were older models, T-20CXS, BT-7s, and a handful of early T-34s welded together from wrecks scavenged from the battlefield. But what they lacked in modern firepower, they made up for with deception. Semyonov developed unorthodox tactics. His crews painted their tanks with whitewash to blend with the snow, trained in silence, and moved only at night. They built false tank tracks leading away from their real positions. They used broken radios as decoys, broadcasting fake coordinates to mislead the Germans. Their mechanics removed mufflers to mimic the sound of larger Panther tanks. They struck hard and vanished before counterattacks could be organized. The 54th's baptism of fire came during the Siege of Kalik, a critical supply town west of Stalingrad. German panzer forces had surrounded the area, cutting off Soviet infantry units from retreat. Semyonov's tanks, traveling by night across frozen rivers, launched a surprise attack on the German rear. A dozen tanks appeared seemingly from nowhere, blowing up fuel depots and crippling communications. The Germans were thrown into confusion. Within 48 hours, Soviet infantry had broken through the weakened lines. From that moment, the 54th became legend. Their most famous engagement occurred during Operation Uranus, the Soviet counteroffensive that encircled Stalingrad. Intelligence had revealed a hidden Luftwaffe airstrip supplying the trapped German Sixth Army. Destroying it would isolate the enemy and hasten their collapse. But the strip was defended by anti-tank emplacements, machine gun nests, and miles of open steppe. Semyonov's solution was madness. Under cover of a blizzard, the 54th buried their tanks in snowbanks during the day, painting tarps to resemble drifts. That night, they crept forward using tree cover and bomb craters. When dawn broke, the Germans awoke to an empty field, and then, out of the snow, emerged 20 tanks charging at full speed. The Luftwaffe base was annihilated. Fuel stores exploded. Mess halls were crushed under treads. In the final moments, a female tank commander named Sergeant Tamara Belova drove her T-34 directly into a bunker full of ammunition, sacrificing herself and silencing the last German radio post. Her charred helmet was later found among the rubble, still bearing the red star. Of the 54th's original 300 members, fewer than 80 survived the Battle of Stalingrad. But their actions helped sever the German lifeline. General Paulus surrendered 2 months later. The Soviet press made no mention of the 54th. They were too irregular, too undisciplined, too unofficial. After the war, Semyonov was arrested by the NKVD. His file, buried in the depths of the KGB archives, accused him of operational independence inconsistent with party loyalty. He was executed in 1947. 4 decades, the 54th vanished from history. But in 1996, a German historian named Klaus Engelhardt, researching German panzer losses in the Don region, came across multiple Wehrmacht after-action reports referring to an invisible Russian armored regiment. His curiosity led him to Volgograd, where he met Ivan Zykov, an old man living in a crumbling apartment. Zykov had been the youngest driver in the 54th. He spoke slowly, his memory flickering like old film, but his story never changed. He remembered the cold, the sound of treads breaking ice, the scent of oil and blood. And he remembered Semyonov's final words before their last assault: "They see steel. Show them ghosts." Engelhardt tracked down 4 other survivors, all scattered across Russia. Each had scars. Each had stories. None had medals. In 2003, a memorial was quietly erected near the ruins of Kalakondan. It bore no names, only the image of a tank emerging from the snow, and a quote carved in granite. Asterisk. "We moved like silence. We struck like thunder. And then we were gone." Asterisk. Today, Russian military academies study guerrilla tank tactics that mirror those developed by the 54th. Few acknowledge the source. Fewer still remember the names. But in the frostbitten steppes, where rusted tank hulks still lie half buried in snow, some say you can hear the rumble of engines when no vehicle is in sight. They say the 54th still rides, ghosts of steel and fire, born of war, swallowed by history. The Vatican Protocol Secrets of Operation Black Sand. In 1944, as Rome teetered between occupation and liberation, a war not of bombs but of whispers unfolded within the marble corridors of the Vatican. Officially neutral, the Holy See was a diplomatic island in a sea of fascist control. But behind the frescoes and incense, Operation Black Sand, a secret OSS mission, sought to uncover whether the Vatican's neutrality was a veil for something far more dangerous. At the heart of the operation was Father Daniel Macaulay, an Irish-American priest fluent in Latin and German, who had studied theology in Rome before the war. Recruited by the Office of Strategic Services, Macaulay was selected not just for his intellect and piety, but for his ability to move in clerical circles without drawing attention. His mission was simple in theory: gather intelligence on whether Pope Pius XII's network was assisting Nazi war criminals, especially those associated with the SS and Gestapo, in escaping through the so-called Ratlands. To the Vatican hierarchy, Macaulay was just another young priest, recently arrived to assist with translation work. In truth, his Roman apartment was outfitted with a primitive listening device installed by a Czech agent loyal to the Allies. His missives to the OSS were disguised as theological commentaries and sent weekly through diplomatic pouch. The operation was named Black Sand, after the volcanic soil of the Roman countryside, rich, quiet, and capable of hiding anything beneath its surface. Macaulay quickly learned that the Vatican was a spider's web of conflicting allegiances. Some cardinals were staunch anti-fascists who secretly sheltered Jews and resistance fighters. Others viewed the Nazis as a necessary bulwark against communism. Within this murk, a shadowy group of priests operated under Cardinal Alois Redlich, an Austrian prelate with known sympathies to the Reich. Redlich was seldom seen, his activities cloaked in official charity missions to displaced persons camps. One evening, Macaulay was summoned to assist with translating a German document found among the belongings of a deceased Croatian priest. The paper, riddled with euphemisms, appeared benign. But Macaulay recognized phrases used in Nazi transfer protocols, coded instructions for the relocation of high-ranking officers through neutral territories. A scribbled margin note read, "Confirmed departure from Genoa, March 15, SS Hauptsturmführer MK." The Vatican claimed the document was a forgery, but Macaulay now had his lead. He followed the trail to a Franciscan monastery outside Rome, where he posed as a visiting archivist. There, he uncovered a second layer of the operation: forged baptismal certificates used to provide new identities for fleeing Nazis. The network extended from Rome to Genoa, where smugglers, often former fascist officials, provided false papers, safe passage, and even ships bound for Argentina. Macaulay wasn't the only one hunting. The German Sicherheitsdienst, SD, had sent its own men to monitor the Vatican's internal communications. One such operative, codenamed Rufus, identified Macaulay and began feeding him misinformation. Over the course of 3 weeks, Macaulay began to doubt his allies, his intelligence, and even the intentions of the OSS itself, which had grown uncharacteristically silent. Everything changed on Palm Sunday, 1944. Macaulay received a note, tucked into the folds of his robe during Mass, that read only, "Lucerna waits at midnight beneath the Archangel's wing." That night, Macaulay climbed Castel Sant'Angelo and met his informant, a Swiss diplomat with ties to both the Vatican and the Red Cross. Known only as Lucerna, Latin for lamp, she confirmed that elements within the Curia were knowingly facilitating Nazi escapes, some under the pretense of spiritual asylum. The process was called the Shepherd's Path, a chain of monasteries and safehouses stretching across Europe to South America. Lucerna provided Macaulay with damning evidence: letters signed by Cardinal Redlich authorizing transfers for men like Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, and SS officer Martin Kirschner, recently spotted in Milan with forged Dominican credentials. She also warned him he had less than 72 hours before the SD moved against him. With the documents hidden inside the spine of a Latin missile, Macaulay attempted to flee through a Vatican courier route into liberated territory. But as he crossed the threshold of the Apostolic Palace, he was detained, not by Germans, but by Vatican guards. What followed was 3 hours of interrogation by the Secretariat of State. Macaulay pleaded for an audience with the Pope, but it was denied. The documents were confiscated. By morning, he was quietly escorted to the Swiss border under diplomatic expulsion. Back in London, OSS leadership was livid. The operation had failed to bring proof to the public. Without physical documents, and unwilling to accuse the Vatican publicly during a fragile moment in the war, the Allies shelved Operation Black Sand. But Macaulay did not forget. After the war, he returned to Rome as a civilian researcher and quietly gathered testimony from others involved in the Shepherd's Path. In 1953, under a pseudonym, he published a book, *Veils of Marble*, that hinted at the Vatican's role. It was dismissed as fiction by the Church, but intelligence circles knew the truth. In 1999, decades after Macaulay's death, Italian historian Livia Bonatti uncovered a hidden compartment in the Vatican archives, misfiled under post-war relief. Inside were Redlich's personal notes and correspondences that matched the ones Macaulay had described. With pressure from human rights groups, the Vatican later acknowledged that certain individuals within its ranks may have acted in ways not aligned with the moral responsibility of the Church. Lucerna's true identity was never confirmed, though a Swiss woman named Mariette Eberly received posthumous recognition from Yad Vashem as a righteous among the nations. No direct connection was made. Today, in a small chapel within Castel Sant'Angelo, a single lamp burns beside a plaque that reads, "In memory of those who walked in light while surrounded by shadow." The Vatican never officially confirmed Operation Black Sand. But among historians, theologians, and spies alike, the mission remains one of the war's most complex riddles, a tale of truth buried beneath ritual, and a priest who dared to look God in the eye and ask, "What did you allow to pass in your name?" Echoes over Midway, the Lost Squadron. On June 5, 1942, in the aftermath of the Battle of Midway, a squadron of 12 American torpedo bombers, designated VT-51, vanished from the skies without a trace. Their last transmission was brief, cryptic, and unnerving: "Clouds closing in. Angels above." No wreckage was recovered. No bodies found. For decades, the Navy listed them as Kia, presumed lost at sea. But their disappearance became legend, fuel for conspiracy theories, whispers among veterans, and the occasional classified inquiry. The official record simply stated, "Engaged and lost due to probable mechanical failure and enemy fire during return." But the real story, buried under layers of redacted reports and a single sealed envelope in a Pentagon archive labeled "Classified, Juno Protocol," began 2 days before the famed battle even started. VT-51, flying outdated TBD Devastators, was attached to the USS Enterprise. Their commander, Lieutenant Reuben Carter, was a quiet Missourian with a reputation for flying low and thinking lower. His squadron had survived Coral Sea and Guadalcanal, and while most of the Navy viewed them as expendable, flying obsolete aircraft in a war of superior zeros, Carter's crew had an uncanny knack for survival. But something changed in early June. 3 days before Midway, Carter received sealed orders directly from Admiral Nimitz's intelligence staff. The details were known only to him. After that, he stopped briefing his squadron in full. Instead, they rehearsed unusual flight patterns, low-altitude crossovers, fuel conservation spirals, and long-range vector shifts inconsistent with standard combat maneuvers. The other pilots assumed it was a bluff or a morale tactic. But Carter, usually stoic, seemed rattled. Then came the battle. While the rest of the Navy focused on disabling the Japanese carriers, VT-51 was diverted north, away from the main conflict. Their assignment: investigate a radar anomaly near Grid 17A, a remote patch of open ocean where, according to decrypted Japanese transmissions, a possible secondary carrier group was operating independently. That group was never confirmed in post-war Japanese records. But several Japanese veterans interviewed decades later referenced a secret fleet test under Admiral Kosaka, operating with prototype escort carriers and an experimental weapons division. These ships never returned from Midway, and their existence was quietly erased by Tokyo Command. VT-51 flew directly into the unknown. Radar logs from the Enterprise captured their faint signal heading toward Grid 17A, climbing into cloud cover. Weather records show a storm system moving in rapidly, unusual for that time of year, with abrupt pressure drops and isolated magnetic distortion. Pilots from a nearby PBY Catalina recalled seeing streaks of fire disappearing into the clouds. A cryptic entry in the ship's log noted strange echoes on sonar at 2,200 hours, followed by silence. Then came Carter's final message: "Clouds closing in. Angels above." It was dismissed at the time as a spiritual utterance, men facing death. But in the years after the war, retired cryptographers who worked for the ONI during the Pacific Campaign revealed that angels was a prearranged term for aerial anomalies or unconfirmed aircraft. It wasn't prayer, it was code. The Navy kept the incident buried. Families were told the planes were lost during an attack run. No mention of Grid 17A. No admission of a secret enemy fleet. No follow-up. Until 1987. That year, a Japanese-American research team, investigating wartime wreckage as part of a joint reconciliation project, used deep-sea drones to map part of the Pacific floor north of Midway. What they found shocked everyone: remnants of a small carrier with Japanese markings not listed in any naval registry, and several twisted metal fragments consistent with the airframes of TBD Devastators. The sonar scan was incomplete. Most of the site was embedded in a deep trench, but the location matched Grid 17A. The footage showed one intact wing bearing the faded serial number, VT-51-7. And something else. Footage from the submersible showed unusual metallic plating on the Japanese wreck, a feature not used in known carrier construction at the time. Naval historians speculated it might have been part of a weapons testing vessel. Some theories suggested an early radar jamming experiment gone wrong. Others whispered of captured American technology, or worse, biological experimentation. In 2001, declassified files from the OSS hinted that during 1942, the Allies received intercepted transmissions referencing Operation Kurokage, Black Shadow, an Imperial Japanese experiment involving weather manipulation and high-altitude aircraft shielding. Though dismissed as wartime fantasy, the documents referenced a ship group operating under secrecy in the North Pacific, outside regular command. Carter had flown straight into the storm. A surviving crewman from the USS Enterprise, now in his 90s, recalled Carter's last briefing. He said, "We weren't flying into battle," he told the filmmakers of a documentary later shelved. He said we were flying into a secret, and we might not come back. Today, a plaque on the flight deck of the decommissioned USS Enterprise includes the names of VT-51's crew, but no mention of Grid 17A or their unique orders. The Navy has yet to acknowledge the 1987 discovery, citing lack of conclusive evidence. But a single artifact displayed quietly in a Hawaiian naval museum tells a different story. A battered altimeter, recovered from the ocean floor, its needle frozen at 32,000 feet, impossible for the aircraft that carried it. The final mystery is Carter's logbook, found sealed in a storage locker owned by his nephew in 2015. The last entry, dated June 5, 1942, reads, "If we do not return, let it be known. We flew not for glory or orders, but because someone had to know what the storm was hiding. There are shadows above the clouds. If you hear echoes, listen. We were there. Some say the sea keeps its secrets, but others believe that on certain nights, when the wind shifts over Midway and the clouds roll low, you can hear the faint rumble of old engines and a voice on static radio, still trying to send a warning. Clouds closing in. Angels above." Children of the Fog, the Orphans of Dresden. On the night of February 13, 1945, the sky above Dresden turned to fire. British and American bombers unleashed nearly 4,000 tons of explosives, creating a firestorm that incinerated buildings, melted steel, and turned the streets into rivers of flame. Thousands perished in hours. But amid the smoke and rubble, something unexpected emerged: a group of children who would come to be known as Die Kinder des Nebels, the Children of the Fog. Their leader was Jacob Ehrlich, a 14-year-old with a crooked grin and the quiet command of someone who had survived too much. Before the war, he had been the son of a Jewish clockmaker. After his father was taken to their Scienstadt and his mother conscripted into forced labor, Jacob lived on the margins, stealing food, ducking patrols, and surviving off wit. When the bombs fell, he was in a train yard stealing coal. He ran into the smoke while others fled, drawn toward the city's screams, until the fog of destruction swallowed everything. In the days following the bombing, the adults of Dresden were too few and too broken to help. Many children had been orphaned, trapped beneath rubble, or left alone when parents never returned from the fire shelters. The city became a silent grave, where the living scurried like ghosts. Jacob, along with a ragged handful of survivors, aged between 6 and 15, took refuge in the storm drains beneath Neustadt. The tunnels, remnants of an old sewer system, were dry and largely intact. It was here that the Children of the Fog were born. There were 23 of them at first. Jacob knew every tunnel entrance and exit. He assigned jobs: some would scavenge the ruins above for food, others would keep fires lit using furniture scraps, while the youngest were kept below, taught to remain quiet when boots echoed from above. They had no weapons, but Jacob found a map of Dresden in a half-burned post office, which they used to chart safe zones and hazards. They marked buildings with charcoal symbols, triangles for usable food, circles for dangerous debris, crosses for German patrol routes. Their greatest threat wasn't just hunger or infection, but the roving military police hunting for looters or deserters. To them, these children were vermin. More than one of the group disappeared after being caught above ground. Jacob imposed strict rules. No speaking above a whisper. No scavenging alone. No fire above the street level. He enforced these rules harshly, once locking a boy in a tunnel alcove for a day after he returned shouting for help. Jacob wasn't cruel, but he knew what the world outside had become. Noise kills, he would say. Word of the underground children began to spread among the few surviving civilians. Some sympathized and left scraps near storm drains. Others denounced them to soldiers, fearing punishment. But still the children survived, digging deeper into the tunnels, collecting rainwater, and salvaging medical supplies from a bombed-out pharmacy. The group's youngest was Elsa, just 5 years old. She never spoke after the bombing, only held a charred doll and followed Jacob everywhere. It was she who first saw the American planes flying overhead in April. Unlike the bombers of February, these aircraft dropped leaflets, not bombs. The war, it said, was ending. But for the children, survival remained a day-by-day struggle. Their lives changed one night in May, when a wounded man stumbled into their tunnel. He was an escaped Soviet prisoner, emaciated, with a bullet wound in his side. The children should have run. But Jacob took him in, hiding him in a crawlspace and nursing him back to health using stolen linens and boiled water. The man's name was Mikhail. He had been captured near Warsaw, escaped a transport, and wandered into the ruins of Dresden. When he recovered, he taught the children how to build proper ventilation and helped them build a hand-cranked generator from the remains of an old tram. For the first time, the underground had light. Mikhail called them fog children, for the way they emerged from nowhere and vanished again. Under his guidance, Jacob's group became more organized. They mapped the entire surviving sewer system. They located an old Red Cross bunker and turned it into a storehouse. Mikhail told them stories of his home, sang in Russian, and gave Jacob a pocketknife carved with the letters, Freedom. But nothing lasted in Dresden. In June, a military patrol discovered the bunker. The children fled deeper into the tunnels. Mikhail stayed behind to delay them. Gunfire echoed through the pipes. They never saw him again. That night, Jacob made the decision that saved them all. The war was ending, he believed. But they would not wait to be found. Instead, they would walk, following the Elbe, by night, underground and above, until they reached the American lines. It took 9 days. They traveled through burnt fields, ghost towns, and muddy woods. They stole food from abandoned Wehrmacht camps and kept moving. On the 10th morning, near a village called Riesa, they encountered an American patrol. The soldiers didn't understand what they were seeing. 24 filthy, silent children led by a gaunt teenager with a map in one hand and a knife in the other. Jacob refused to speak until Elsa whispered something to the Americans. She says we are the fog. But we are not lost. The Americans took them in. They were registered, deloused, and taken to a refugee camp near Leipzig. Jacob refused to be separated from the others. He was allowed to stay, and eventually, through the help of aid workers, the group was kept together. By 1950, most had been relocated, some to Britain, others to the United States or Sweden. Jacob went to Switzerland, where he eventually studied medicine. Elsa was adopted by a Danish couple. She would later become a poet. The group kept in touch through letters. Once a year, on the anniversary of the bombing, they sent postcards with foggy landscapes. No words, just mist. In 2005, on the 60th anniversary of the end of the war, a small bronze plaque was installed near the storm drain at Alonstrasse in Dresden. It reads, "Here, beneath fire and ruin, children built a world of silence and survival. They were not soldiers. They were not rescued. They saved themselves. Asterisk. And in a museum drawer in Leipzig lies a simple piece of chalk, found decades later inside a tunnel. On the wall above it, someone had drawn the shape of a house, a sun, and 23 stick figures holding hands. Below it, in a child's handwriting, asterisk, still here, still ours, asterisk. Some truths rot in silence, sealed beneath robes and relics. But when the smoke clears, the question remains, how far will power go to absolve itself? The men who vanished into the night wore crosses, not chains. And those who helped them escape, they still light candles. In the end, the Vatican's greatest sin wasn't silence, it was knowing. And what it chose to forget, still echoes beneath the dome.